Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Vivid Earth. It's Anina Malherbe-Lan back. And today I've got one of my favorite people in the Intel world who I always is my go-to for reliable information and excellent research, SG Anon. SG, welcome. How are you?
Doing well, Anina. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, you're a busy man. I'm sure these days, I mean, the way that the disclosure and the intel is kind of dropping on us, it's rapid fire right now, and it's Red October. Perhaps not as red as we'd wanted it to be yet, but October is not over yet. Maybe we can just kick off with what is your take on where we currently are, within the next week or two. We've got obviously the elections coming up in the US, which is a big sort of marker. Where do you think we at this stage in this incredible spiritual covert war that we're in?
That is the all-encompassing question, Anina. Where are we with respect to the military continuity of government operation in the United States, the transmutation of the Western world from the old archetype to the new archetype, and of course, the financial component of that? It is such an incredible time to be alive and to be aware that these changes are actually occurring. If you could, rewind the clock, say back to the early invention of the first steam-powered valves, or the first steam powered generators and engines, or go back to the time where the first hewn sailboat was cut from very large trees and strung together and sent out on the open sea. You would not realize, of course, in those days, the level of change, the level of alteration that you're bringing to the world, things that fundamentally altered the behavior of the world forever. We're in that period of time right now in a different fashion, and yet we are consciously aware of the implications for this period of time because of the realization of the level of evil that's been in control of various power pulpits for a very long time, multiple generations. Where we're at is a difficult question to answer. So I'm gonna offer some observations as my answer points, sort of like line item and bulletin points. President
Perfect.
Trump continues to tell us, really over the last 4 to 6 weeks, very heavily that a 1929 style event is expected in the United States of America. And increasingly in the last 3 weeks, we're seeing rhetoric referencing military intervention on election day, some sort of attack or some sort of terrorist event happening in the United States. He continues to remind crowds that we're going to rebuild Washington, D.C., which tells me that that city in particular is a military target of some kind. We know that there are several satanic weapons of war, frequency weapons of war that are built on the ley line that runs underneath D.C. Those have to be removed to elevate the consciousness of the planet. The same is true in other areas of the world, but specifically with D.C., because I speak from the point of an American here. So looking at that rhetoric just by itself and the increasing veracity of that as we close in on this November 5th date, that tells me that we're very, very close to some significant cascade chain sequence of events playing off, whether that is a stolen election, financial markets, and an attack, whether it is a different order, including all of those variables, whether there are other variables at play. We really don't know. And it would be inappropriate to try and speculate and tell your audience, yes, it's going to be this way, or no, it's going to be that way. But what we do know fundamentally outside of Trump's rhetoric is we also have the progression of the economic alliances and bulwarks that are being built around the rest of the planet to absorb the crash of the US dollar and of the SWIFT NATO Western world financial banking system, that central banking system. We've got Russia that has now ironed out multi-angular trade agreements and built 3 new trade routes with Central and Eastern Asia. We have incredible cooperation with Moscow in the Middle East. We have Beijing cooperating in the Middle East. Both Moscow and Beijing are heavily involved in Africa. South Africa is an interesting jewel on top of that because South Africa is helping to put pressure on the Western world financial system vis-a-vis their court filings against Israel in the court of the International Criminal Court for war crimes and genocide. So that puts a very significant economic pressure against the Israeli state, right? And it's worth remembering, Anina, when we talk about putting pressure on these other entities, in an irregular warfare capacity, psychological pressure, perceptive pressure, a public opinion pressure of the planet writ large is just as effective as a JDAM bomb. The ability to destroy public opinion and augment public perception to a way that is digestible for whatever your goal is, whether it's de-dollarization, the removal of the Mossad military intelligence infestation, the removal of the U.S. war machine in the Middle East, or others, irrespective of what that goal is, the ability to shift and augment that perception is absolutely critical. South Africa has played a huge, huge part in that. So looking at all of these things that are sort of lining up, here we are at the end of this, supposed Red October. Today is the 29th of October, 2024 here in the United States. So this is our 100-year anniversary of what happened in, of course, the 29th of October, 1929. So almost 100 years, I guess, at this point, nearly. It's a very interesting and fascinating convergence. And this, we haven't even gotten into, Anina. I could wax all day on how these things tie back to the Chinese military campaign, the Taiwanese situation that's happening in the Pacific, the Suez Canal, and the commercial implications that it has for worldwide commerce, the shutting down of the Strait of Hormuz. We now have a multilateral alliance developing between Riyadh and Tehran, Sunni Muslims and Shiite Muslims coming together at an international diplomatic arena to cast consternation against a common foe. This is an incredible time period in human history. We're witnessing complete geopolitical realignment of the planet. And I'm expecting over the next 60 to 90 days that we're going to throw gasoline on that fire in a way that we've not done before.
Absolutely. I mean, that was a mouthful. There's so much there that I can comment on and ask questions. Just on the Washington, D.C., that what was interesting for me is that just in the last few days, we've seen a lot of fencing going up again. We've seen some sort of structure being built in front of the White House, I think on the lawn, like almost like a stage, or I don't know what. So it's very interesting to see what's happening. And yes, Trump has spoken about renovating the White House several times. We know there are very deep tunnels under there that had to be cleaned out. Well, I hope they are cleaned out by now. I would imagine that would be one of their first targets. So there's definitely something interesting brewing. And yeah, we can definitely expect some sort of event. I mean, we've been told there will be a precipice event that will bring humanity together, unite them. But there's just so much that I can comment on. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Saudi Arabia, it's come up in the BRICS conference that they will not be joining at this time. I don't know if you saw that or what your take is on that, but that was an interesting thing because Saudi Arabia is a very important country within the mix. The whole sort of petrodollar thing. We know that they've basically, that agreement that has ended with the US, that was last year, the year before, that 50-year agreement, I think, protection in exchange for trading oil in US dollar. What is your take on that? Why would they have pulled out at such a critical time?
It's a really fascinating point, what we have happening with respect to Riyadh in particular and this entire worldwide setup. We know that President Trump and Crown Prince bin Salman have a very close and very, very personal relationship. There's a number of different angles on that. Q reminded us on the boards a long time ago that at least at one point along in this journey, President Trump actually assisted in essentially the salvation of Crown Prince bin Salman from an assassination attempt. So looking at the behavior of bin Salman and Saudi Arabia in general, my first supposition, and it would be a supposition, is that it has to be aligned with whatever is beneficial for President Trump and President Trump's political, aspirations here in the United States, because having President Trump back in office publicly is a major, major objective of this military continuity operation. We have to do that lawfully and legally. We have to have the will of the people on board. Once we can get that, once we attain that, then we can really take the screws to the system publicly in a digestible way. So getting him back into office has to be, paramount. I could see Saudi Arabia slow walking their admission into BRICS to allow for popular sentiment in the United States to carry Trump all the way through to the White House. I think it's more likely, to be perfectly honest with you, Anina, that we're seeing Saudi Arabia sort of trepidatious at the watering hole with respect to this new economic alliance, because we have a good example over the last 100 years of the entirety of the Middle East at different nation state levels getting co-opted, taken advantage of, won over, etc., on behalf of Westerners or foreigners that seek to essentially profit off of their resources and the clout that they have controlling what they control in the Middle East. So I think that's a consideration as well. I think another consideration with respect to that is military. We just saw Iranian and Saudi Arabian joint naval drills for the first time in their history. That was done in the Strait of Hormuz, which the two countries, of course, share control of, Iran on one side, Saudi Arabia on the other. And so having those joint naval drills as evidenced out for a broader level of international cooperation at a significant level, you're talking about military pulpits of power between these two governments. We may also have a situation where Iran or Tehran and Riyadh have had backdoor conversations about what is most beneficial to the Iranian mission there in the Middle East, which is essentially to throw out the CIA and the U.S. military warlord machine. And at the same time, we have to drag out the deep state infiltration of the IRGC, which is just the Iranian extension of our CIA. And it's very possible that we saw Iran, ask Saudi Arabia to slow walk bringing what they have resource-wise and certainly liquidity-wise to the table for one reason or another. And again, it's just speculation on my part, Anina. This is not something that I've had a chance to really dig into. I'm just, reading the lay of the land here. We have multi-angular cooperative agreements. Everyone has to get a little bit of what they want. What the Middle East countries and the Islamic Arab countries want more than anything, I think, at this point in time, is some sort of predictable stability or some sort of scaffolding where they can establish a predictable stability. And Saudi Arabia's involvement with BRICS, specifically with the level of oil and the precious metals and rare earth minerals that they bring to the table, that's going to affect whatever those stability objectives are in the region for a very long time.
Yeah, that's a very good observation, and it sounds like quite a logical reasoning, definitely from our side. Now, we've been expecting some sort of crash of the financial system, bank failures, the US dollar, and along with that, obviously the RV, Nasara Jasara. Can you maybe fill us in your point of view of where all of this is standing right now and how you see all of this kind of play out?
Well, with respect to the reorientation and sort of redefinition of worldwide commerce markets and worldwide trade behavior, we're already seeing essentially the scaffolding, the underpinning, the framework of Nasara and Jasara all being rolled out all at once in multiple different nodes throughout the planet. And this is something that I've been telling patriots for a long time, Anina, is we came online 4 or 5 years ago as this alternate media space. And one of the things that the alternate media space latched onto very quickly was debt, remuneration and jubilee for the fleecing of the populations of the Western world over the last 100 and some odd, really, 300-400 years, but certainly in its current form for over a century. And that latching on, I think, was well intended and well meant, but perhaps a little bit short-sighted in the broad scope of how these types of things have to come together, because you cannot dump trillions into a liquidity market, no matter what market you're talking about worldwide, and expect that market to handle that level of injection. That's sort of like taking the PVC water pipes underneath your home and hooking them up to the city water main at fire hydrant pressure. They're just not going to be able to take it. They'll end up collapsing or you'll end up causing more damage and more harm than good in the long run. So what we have and what we've been witnessing over the last, several years at this point, really since 2017, 2018, is the slow death of the entirety of the Western world economic model and the redefinition of that economic model with a model that's more commensurate with God's money, God's balance, God's law, living with one another in fairness, and certainly having a standardized measure of value exchange where we can decide how much our currency, how much our nations, how much what we bring to the table is actually worth. We're witnessing Zimbabwe in that process now, policing their country very heavily to destroy the black market Forex dealers forever. They've already revalued their currency internally. It's doing very well. Indonesia is under the same orientation right now with respect to their currency. Iraq is in conversations with the World Bank on a proper RV valuation for them to roll out to public markets. And we're expecting that anytime in the next 60 to 90 days. And that is going to just completely upend everything on the planet. Vietnam is positioned to reorient and revalue. North Korea is now positioned to reorient and revalue. And we have military coordination from both Vietnam and North Korea with China and with Russia on the ground in East Asia, destroying the arms trade that's coming off of the East Asian shelf that has been responsible for a tremendous amount of criminality in Vladivostok over the last 50 to 60 years. It's an unbelievable, remarkable time. And all of it comes back to the reimagination of how finance and commerce works worldwide. The Western market system, going all the way back to the British Empire, has dominated commerce and trade for at least the last 500 years. We now have to deploy, after building out an infrastructure and a scaffold, we now have to deploy a worldwide infrastructure and architecture that can take and facilitate a fair and just level of value exchange and trade, and then secure that process of value exchange and trade from corruption, from money laundering, from dark and deep levels of criminality, both for now and for the future to our posterity. So all of that's a really long answer to say we are well underway with this. If you look at the behavior of gold in recent weeks, over $2,600 an ounce. If you look at the behavior of silver, it's shooting up in recent days and weeks. It's had a couple of hiccups, but it's beginning to catch up. But also, Anina, the other thing that patriots out there can sort of watch to track a lot of the progress here are the commodity markets with respect to the ores and the hard earth minerals and the rare earth minerals that are being pulled out. You've got lithium that's revaluing at an incredible rate, cobalt, platinum, tungsten, copper, all of these resources that are very tangible. They're industrially important. They carry sort of an intrinsic value of their own. Oil, liquefied natural gas, silicon, other things like that. We could list all day what these tangible assets are comprised of. But when you look at the behavior of those markets relative to all other markets worldwide, it is clear that we are transitioning away from a system that is reliant on fraud for its basis of valuation, and more to a system that is reliant on what can I see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and hold in my hand right here, right now, that has value.
Well said. Now, there's been a lot of speculation about BRICS. I had somebody recently come to me again and say, yeah, but it looks like BRICS is part of the New World Order. And, you look at, there was an article I read, and I forgot what that link, I can share that link in the comments, I'm sure I'll have it. But it spoke about, the UN's involvement, and so I think some of these people assume that, because there's cooperation with the UN, that it must be, part of this sinister plan. It's us, the patriots, thinks this is a new financial system coming in, but in the meantime, they're just collecting on this side, the globalists. And so what can you say to people about that? I mean, I've also heard that, and maybe you can comment on this as well, the UN, that it might be repurposed and cleaned out, not destroyed. Do you have anything sort of that you can comment on those aspects?
Well, the repurposing has already occurred, and the repurposing was a temporary objective right from the very beginning. We needed to capture the angles and essentially the resources that some of these agencies and institutions, going back at least 100 years or nearly 100 years here in the Western world, we needed to be able to convert them for our purposes, to take them over, to have them work in tandem for us. And so that's exactly what we did during that first Trump administration. If people think the real Bill Gates is still out there in the world, they're fooling themselves. And the same is true of the real Klaus Schwab. Both are gone and have been long gone for a very long time. And what that represents, what that is that is a submission arrangement that has occurred to facilitate exactly what you just described a moment ago, which is the dismantling of these institutions. That is also going to happen. But it is worth noting that God tends to utilize the infrastructure that the evil one has built to do harm, to turn that right around on the evil one and allow that to be done to them. And I think that's exactly what we have playing out in the world. It's only been 48 hours ago that the Russian State Duma publicly called for the dismantling of the United Nations and the redefinition or the reimagination of worldwide international policing. The United Nations was essentially put into place publicly as an optic. It was claimed to be put into place to manage peace and to help restrict warfare scenarios, to help act as a mediating body amongst disagreements and quarrels between nation states, because at the end of the day, the ideal of no war and utilizing our our mouths and our hands rather than our guns and our brawn to handle things is much more attractive than blowing one another up. At the same time, however, we've seen in that period of time over these last 80 years now at this point, more than 155 conflicts break out around the rest of the world. Most of it spawned off by the NATO military aligned forces that would be under the purview of that Western world UN. So to see Russia now publicly acclaiming that the UN needs to be dismantled, to see Israel choosing to designate the RNRWA as a terrorist organization. And it is worth remembering, Anina, that while Israel's behavior at the governmental and military level has been absolutely abhorrent and reprehensible, it is worth noting that the UNRWRA and UNESCO and USAID and other slush fund globalist concentrations of power and influence like that have been a major contributing factor for organ harvesting, for blood and pathogen trafficking, and for weapons and human smuggling all around the planet, because they're able to pop up in a disaster zone, virtually no diplomatic oversight possible. The press is in all of their pockets, and they're able to do essentially whatever they want. So while I disagree on its face fundamentally with the foreign policy behavior of what's happening out of what I consider to be the deep state government of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, Israel, I acknowledge the benefit of what Israel has just recently done with respect to the UN. So, and they're not the only ones, right? We have China sort of pulling the same type of punches, but they're in a much more shrewd type of rhetorical way. We have South Africa that has said some similar things from their political pulpits of power. A number of other nations have vocalized the same opposition. And again, Anina, this is just all within the last 12 months. So we're moving the world clearly towards a period where the UN is going to be dismantled and something new be put in its place, whether it is an international co-op, whether it is an adjoined worldwide quantum trade alliance that allows for expanded diplomatic cooperation, whether, we really don't know what it's going to look like, but we know that it is going to be dismantled and replaced. On that, I'd like to add one final point to that topic and say that one of the reasons that the invasion of the United States of America has been allowed to happen in the way that it has is because we needed the ability in the United States, under the rules of engagement, the international laws of war, US code, and US national emergency conditions, to assign military combatant identification to civilian political bodies. That included the United Nations. It also includes all of the NGOs that spawn from the United Nations. It also includes all of the other foundations and arms, the philanthropic arms that come off of the United Nations. And it includes any and all institutions, organizations, and entities that are taking money directly from United Nations or United Nations associated NGOs and organizations, which is nearly all of pharma, academia, healthcare, a great deal of business and finance, and a ton of U.S. industrial manufacturing. We needed the ability to throw a dragnet so enormous that everyone was made a military target against the United States of America, because only then do we have the lawful and legal justification to assign military law to a temporary period of emergency and clean out the infestation inside the U.S. from the globalist pulpit. Once that infestation is cleaned out in the U.S., the saying goes, if America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. I'm very much hoping that the rest of the world will catch our cold before the day is up.
Yeah, that's very well said, and I think it's a different take on what a lot of people have been discussing, around the issue of migrants or immigrants, and it's certainly a very interesting point of view. Now, a lot of people are commenting that there's in the US National Guard pretty much everywhere. Do you think this is part of this rollout? I mean, Trump's mentioned numerous times that implicated sort of the military is sort of in the background, watching over things. We've seen a speech of his recently wearing black and gold, which is kind of military colors. There's been a lot of comms that he's been, dropping in his speeches, in his interviews. What are your thoughts on that?
It's absolutely fascinating that you should bring that up. We saw just the other day, President Trump put out a post on Truth Social that Dan Scavino then shared, which was him wearing a dark MAGA hat trimmed in a gold tie with a black suit jacket and black trim around the edge of gold trim around the edge of the picture. And the picture says 10 days at the bottom, and 10 days is all written in gold. And the U.S. Army color scheme is black, light green, and gold. So 10 days of darkness, we've heard that terminology before. We know that President Trump has said multiple times, Anina, again, just in the last few weeks, that the National Guard can be used to restore order on election day if chaos is seen to be breaking out. And if it gets really out of hand, and I'm quoting here, we can use the military. So looking at that particular statement and understanding then that the entirety of this process, and one of the reasons it had to be this way was because we had military turncoats just like we had civilian turncoats. Looking through that period of time, what happens when we have cleaned out all of the military turncoats? Well, now we have a patriotic force aligned behind the proper commander-in-chief. Everyone pretty much understands, I shouldn't say everyone, but a great deal of people understand at this point that there is at least a significant chance. In other words, it's not just pie in the sky. There's a significant chance that President Trump is actually recognized as the proper leader for the United States Armed Forces, certainly the United States Army National Guard, which was a clear reference with the photo that he put out just a few days ago. And I still come back to that 10 days written right there on that photo, Anina. It's like they're putting it right in our face. 2 days before that, he was at a rally in Michigan. I think it was Traverse City, where he said, we've been doing this for 9 years. And in 11 days, it's not going to matter that much anymore, or something along those lines. We'll be doing something else. 9 and 11, right in the same sentence. The man is clearly telling us what's coming down the pike here. And when we see those events transpire, there's an entity online that is the inspiration for a great deal of my platform that tells us it will not be unclear. In other words, it will be very obvious that we are taking back our great country when these events begin to pop off for the public eye. A lot of people are not going to understand it. A lot of Anons and awake patriots are going to be throwing parties out their second and third floor balconies. But understanding that that is the period of time that we are headed for, with the express purpose of restoring we the people to the proper pulpit of authority and power, so that we can get a real handle on the out of control secrecy that's inside our governments and our institutions. I think that is a very heartily encouraging message to see from President Trump, again, just within the last few days.
Yeah, this was very, I mean, if this isn't obvious, then I don't know what is. But a lot of people were expecting the 24th something was going to happen, 25th, I think 28th. But if you think about it, we're only probably going to see something big happening on election day. Sounds like something is going to happen on election day, and that will sort of kick off the military intervention and perhaps the 10 days of darkness. I know we're just speculating here, and we're not supposed to know when it's all going to go down, because they can't tell the enemy when it's going to go down. But what are you feeling around that? Do you think that's a likely sort of course of events?
Well, Anina, personally, and it would just be my opinion, I'm a little bit torn on how this is going to fall. I think November the 5th begins the cascade sequence of events that marks our next phase. I've been telling people for a while that next phase could be a number of different things. I've also been telling people that I fully expected Hillary Clinton to be back into this debacle prior to now. And I've got a little bit of egg on my face with that, which I'll wear proudly. But with respect to
plans
that,
change as well. That's the beauty of this thing. Plans change all the time. It's not cast in concrete. So it could have well been what you said was going to happen, but things change.
well, dealing in hypotheticals, I suppose that is true. But at the same time, I'd like to try and be as accurate as I can in my reporting. Suffice to say, coming forward here with these events, November 5th is clearly going to be the mark and the start of something. President Trump's been telling us for 3 years that it's the most important day in American history. That's a huge statement. We're talking about Pearl Harbor. We're talking about 9/11. You're talking about Gulf of Tonkin. You're talking about the U.S. Civil War, all of the events that happened at the turn of the century, the assassination of President McKinley. And November the 5th, 2024, of all of it, according to President Trump, is going to be the most important day in the history of the country. I'm looking at it like this. If we were to see a landslide turnout with respect to the polls on November the 5th that was so inarguable that you just could not cheat bigly enough to sell the lie to the remainder of the population, but you went ahead and attempted to cheat anyway, I could very well see a scenario break out where those hardcore traitors that we have in government who know that no matter what happens for them, the game is up. I could see them attempting to disqualify Trump after that victory. We've seen Jamie Raskin reference the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, despite the fact that the Supreme Court has already said that Trump has never been convicted of an insurrection of any kind. There's been accusations thrown around left and right, but no actual convictions. So we can't bar him from standing on the ballot. And it was Raskin who said that Congress may have to do its job because the Supreme Court didn't. So looking at that particular sequence of events, Anina, if we were to see that play out, we would see essentially a congressional steal of the election, or a bureaucratic steal, because it's not the Congress, it's the donors and the lobbyists behind the Congress, of the election on the 6th of January, 2021. And that could very well lead to a tumultuous period of time. We could have a financial event between November and January. There's a number of different things that could happen over the holiday season. We could have a World War III style attack on DC, which I'm fully expecting to happen sometime in the next 45 to 60 days. In that period of time, that would precipitate that particular steal. This could play out in a number of different fashions, but I think what is true, Anina, is no matter how it plays out from this point forward, it cannot stay covert anymore. Q told us that 80% was going to be covert to allow for 20% mission success at the end. In other words, we're going to do all of the legwork underneath the table, behind the back door, because that's how we can get the most accomplished in the fastest way possible. And at the last 20% of that, we'll bring it public. We'll really wake the public up, and we'll move things forward. Reclaim the government and move things forward. That's essentially the flavor of how those drops read, and how they interpret them, or how I interpret those drops. So looking at that and appreciating what we've got going on here, there is no fashion in which this plays out where covert operations can continue and maintain structural integrity of the public narrative. We're either going to see a clear Trump victory that is allowed to go forward, or we're going to see a clear Trump victory that is so mangled and marred by election fraud that the other side will have a justifiable axe to say that we don't know who won the election, and an attempted steal based on a disqualification by the Congress. And I think the latter is probably the possibility that we're most likely to see.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And yes, it actually makes sense for all of that chaos to happen. And then the financial sort of not crash, we don't know what if it's going to be a crash, but that financial event that we've been hearing about and speaking about for the last number of years. How do you think the whole celebrity exposure plays into this? I mean, you've seen in the last few days, just Kamala, the people that endorse her are all the people that is right on top of the list, as we know, Epstein and Diddy. Do you think that is kind of building a narrative that's going to involve Kamala in this whole scandal, and that we're going to see some sort of massive disclosure? Will it be before, after? I'm just trying to think, because that is just, we see Beyonce, we see, Eminem, and I forgot who else, but I think Oprah, all of these people that we've been hearing about, suddenly endorsing Kamala, and some of them actually look like they could even be broadcasting from Gitmo. I'm thinking of Leonardo DiCaprio, that looks kind of not really comfortable, and the whole scene just looks weird, where he's giving us that endorsement. How do you think the whole celebrity scene is going to play into what we're going to see happening in November?
I think that you have two parallel points of public awakening, both political and very personal, with respect to crimes against women and children. I think these two parallel points are running in tandem with one another, Anina, and they're going to overlap here in the coming days and weeks. Timing is difficult to say. There's in military campaigns, you don't have dates, you have windows. You have windows of opportunity, windows of availability where things can happen, but there's no hard and fast date until the day of. And so, looking at this particular window, we're at the 29th of October. We're coming into the early election season. If we were going to desecrate Kamala either before, during, or immediately after the election, our window at this point is essentially 10 to 14 days. If we were going to, really expose the Diddy thing pertaining but directly back to Kamala, or even others that are behind Kamala, I would say that we've probably got a maximum window of 21 to 30 days for a really effective narrative prep, and to be able to get that seed into the consciousness and for people to understand what's really at play here. As far as if that's going to happen, I think that's a foregone conclusion. We have images of Barack with P. Diddy. We have images of Kamala with P. Diddy. We have images of Kamala's husband with P. Diddy. We have images of a number of different musicians, of course, with Diddy. And the level of coming out of the woodwork from people that have been associated with that blackmail operation and that particular honeypot operation with Diddy it's absolutely voluminous. It's enormous. So looking at that and seeing that entire ongoing investigation is still ongoing. It's told, or we've been told by press conference, that it's going to involve people that are sort of household names. The individual that gave the conference the first day of said that there are other high profile charges that are going to be coming. We've got really good researchers on the internet that are suggesting a whole cadre of very plausible possibilities to tie back to Diddy as some of the next ones to go down. Jay-Z, of course, Beyonce, who was just at this Kamala rally a few days ago. Certainly anyone in the rap industry that is on the side of endorsing Kamala should be looked at with extreme skepticism and concern at this point. And looking at how that ties back to the political, industry, Anina, we need look no further than that picture of Barack and Diddy. We could insert a number of different political figures into Barack's place there, but fundamentally speaking, what you have with that is you have a handler and you have an asset, and the asset is essentially proving to his handler that the job has been completed and done, and we're where we need to be. That's why you take photos like that. It's a trophy photo. It's not just hey, we're having a good time. So the fallout from Diddy, just like the fallout from Epstein and Maxwell, and just like the fallout from Weinstein, and just like other fallouts that are still yet to come. I think that, again, we're talking about a dragnet, but in this sense, we're not just talking about war criminality. We're talking about crimes against children, which have no statute of limitations. We're talking about crimes against women, which have a statute but are very poorly received by essentially everyone in the Western world. There's just something about that. You don't do that. So this particular exposure that's happening with the Diddy coming back to Kamala, with the Diddy tying back to Pelosi, which is also going to happen before this process is over, in my opinion. I think that is, running parallel to this election season. And I would not put it past, really, again, that next 30 to 45, maybe 60-day period at max. I would not put it past that period where we see massive convergence, what you would call timeline convergence of potentiality, brought to the forefront with respect to exposure and connectivity with that. And we are expecting more arrests and more high profile takedowns, according to law enforcement and investigators that are telling the public what they're doing, where those are expected to come sometime in the weeks and months ahead.
Very well said. And I'm so glad you brought up timelines, because that was going to be my next question. I was going to sort of take it in a slightly different direction and ask your take on timelines, because it does look like there's a few sort of running parallel at the moment, and that there's, as you said, that convergence point. How do you think we have an influence, firstly as digital soldiers, but also we the people at large? How do we have an influence on how timelines play out? What is your take on that? I'm delighted to hear you talk lately about being a multidimensional being and all of these other sort of narratives, which is time to start weaving into, just speaking about the military and the war at large, but really our own sort of consciousness and multidimensionality. But let's just first get back to timelines. How do you see us influencing that timelines in terms of what actually plays out here in the next 3-4 months?
Well, it's all about timelines, and this sounds pie in the sky to a lot of people. It sounds esoteric, difficult to relate to, sort of nebulous and amorphous. But fundamentally speaking, Anina, timelines are the quantum representation of how reality is brought forth from the Holy Spirit. If you consider that we live in a spiritually sustained reality medium, much in the same fashion that a fish swims in the ocean, all right, it's a medium of exchange. The fish does not acknowledge that it's in a different environment than the environment above the water. It simply acknowledges that this is the environment, this is the world that it lives within. The same is true of the Holy Spirit at a macro scale, worldwide, planet wide. So when we look at that sustaining mechanism, we have to say, well, there is clearly an energy, there's clearly God Almighty that is sustaining the Holy Spirit with that infinite supply of the type of energy that creates worlds and stars, right? And funneling that into our reality for us to enjoy and intersect with. And Tesla even figured out in many ways how to harness and appropriately, benefit from. And if we have the ability then to harness that type of energy, then that energy must have within itself a creative flow. I'm trying to wax a little less technical for folks out there because this is something that drags me into my science classes from when I was younger. So fundamentally speaking, what you've got when you're looking at an interdimensional being, the reality that we live in, we have a quantum reality. When we say Holy Spirit, we also say quantum. It's sort of the same thing. It is the ability, or it is the awareness rather, that our reality medium that we live within is itself intelligent. It is a consciousness. It is God. And we are here to be in sort of a glorious synchronistic and symbiotic dance with that God. So if we are then here to dance with that God and be a part of that medium and improve this world, we need access to the energy that God has given us to do that through this world. And we have that access. And that access is through our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, and our understanding of who we are as spiritual beings. We're the apex of creation. We were given the world as regents to manage it, to bring forth more good to it, to multiply. Jesus gives the parable about taking the talents and multiplying them, because that's what a good steward does. And that's exactly what we were given here with this planet. So I'm waxing a long way, but I'm going to bring it back to timelines for the audience out there, I promise. So looking then at the ability to interact with the Holy Spirit's God force energy, we'll just call it God force energy, that is brought through the world, into the world by God. We have the ability to intersect and interact with that through our thoughts, through our feelings, what I call my prayerful meditation. Many people call it their quiet time with the Lord. Many people call it their prayer time with the Lord. What they're doing is they are taking their body, they're taking their mind, their switchboard, their circuit board of interdimensional electrical interactivity and interconnectivity, and they're allowing God, or what I call Jesus, or the Christ, the Spirit of Jesus. When you say you're saved, you have the Spirit of Christ within you. That's what I'm referring to here. They're allowing that Spirit to take over the driver's seat more than their own ego. In other words, not I, Lord, but you who works through me, kind of thing. The ability to do that, Anina, through our thoughts, through our feelings, through our understandings of the world, the ability to try and divine a little bit of what God's will is all about for us, that is the essence of timelines. That is the essence of reality creation. In other words, if you have 50 million people all in a large population base, and each of them want something that is godly, then it's pretty much assured, the potentiality would be 100%, that something is going to happen for that community relative to their living situation with one another, because they all have the same understanding, they all have the same desires, they are all plugged into the same holy spiritual message. And that's the takeaway from that. So in that sense, the human being's agreeance at scale in a group where two or more are gathered, right there I am in the midst, brings about a change that zeroes the potentiality gradient. In other words, it goes from a potential to real. It goes from a possibility to a manifestation. It goes from an esoteric to a see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, touch it right in front of me reality, because we had timeline convergence at the spiritual level. That's what we're experiencing macro civilizationally right now. A timeline convergence of a godly world, a timeline convergence of a preference for liberty, a timeline convergence of a rejection of totalitarianism, a timeline convergence for a desire for God's money, God's method of value exchange, and God's accountability and transparency and value exchange with one another, and a timeline convergence on how we wish to live our lives and take care of our God's earth moving forward. because that is happening macro civilizationally at a spiritual quantum level, there is truly nothing that the other side can do. They can throw as many hurricanes at us as they want. They can burn down as much of our forests and structures and buildings as they want. They can throw earthquakes at us if they want. It does not matter. The cat is out of the bag now, and the quantum spiritual change that is being facilitated through humanity, but inspired by the Almighty of all creation, cannot be stopped.
Yeah, very well said. I 100% agree with that. I think, too many people unfortunately still live in the reaction versus creation sense of being. So people need to realize that we are the creators of this timeline. What we think about, what we imagine, what we draw towards us, that is what will come into existence. So it's very important. We have to take a lot of responsibility for our own thoughts and actions, because we are the one that anchors in this timeline, or not. I see a lot of people like very reactive, like, oh, another hurricane is coming, oh, avian flu, all of these things are like, oh, what are we going to do now? And it's like, just don't focus on it. We literally have the power. As we the people, we have the power. We are the 99%. We are the creative force upon this planet collectively. So whatever we focus on and imagine in our minds and think and feel and take action on, that's what we will see play out in front of us. It's such a difficult concept for people to grasp, but it really is. We are the ones that anchor in, either a higher timeline or a lower timeline. And maybe, there will be both at some point, but right now, collectively, we need to make sure enough of us anchor in the highest timeline. There's no reason to lose hope now. We've come this far. Everyone that's in this movement, that have been, doing the research, gone down the rabbit hole, been through the personal transformation and personal awakening, which, isn't always fun. There are many dark nights of the soul. We've been through this. We are the precipice now. We have to be careful now what we're anchoring in. Just don't expect the worst outcome. It's just, it's not going to be to our benefit. So just collectively focusing on the highest timeline, and not be worried that you're going to be disappointed again, that you're going to be duped again, you're going to be deceived again. Because if that's what you think, then that's what's going to happen. So I think that's something that I just wanted to add in there in terms of timelines.
Well, my late grandmother used to say that if trouble is assured in the future, why would I fret about it now and suffer twice? And so there is some inherent wisdom in that, because if it is already something that is undesirable, if it is already something, in other words, if I've already concluded personally that something is going to be bad, very little is going to be able to shift that, because we are, as you said, co-creative beings with the Almighty and with God, and God allows us, I think, in a large part, to receive the fruit of our mentality and the fruit of the work of our hands. And sometimes the seeds we sow are not so awesome. I am a very guilty individual in that particular regard, and I am not at all afraid to admit that. So looking then at the wisdom of acknowledging that if something is negative, then I would rather face it with a cheerful heart. That allows for, I think, God and Christ to work through us, to find the best avenue, to give us the path of least resistance, understanding that we're walking through the fire. But it's sort of, it comes back to that age-old, quote, Anina, and I think it's even a verse that comes straight from the good book itself. It talks about, yea, though I walk through the valley, you are with me. There is difficulty ahead. There is a situation that's undesirable that I'm facing right now in my life, or at the world at large. But even despite that, there is joy in the morning. There is something else that can come. There is a different quantum potential. There is a different outcome that is possible here, because you are with me. And so in that particular vein, in that essence of discussion, I would say that, irrespective of our suffering here on the ground, irrespective of the difficulties that we face collectively as a people, this has never been a better time to be alive, because for the first time in all of human history, the entirety of the common we the people groups of the planet and especially those that reflect the similar spiritual belief systems, similar faith-based systems that they really hold dear to, and certainly similar cultural understandings. It is the first time in all of history that they've been able to collectively come together with enough spiritual force, enough two or more together, there I am within the midst of them, power to actually change how the planet operates. And as you said a moment ago, it makes no sense to take the black pill now. We're almost there. So keep up the good work, keep up the confidence, keep up the encouragement. This really is the most exciting time to be alive, even if events that are ahead of us and events that we have faced down thus far have not necessarily been the most enjoyable.
Indeed. You know, we can do this. We really can. And many of us have been preparing for this. So for many of us, it may be a walk in the park, you know. So, you know, we've been training for this literally for years, and now's the time. And we have to go all in, you know. I know that I don't want to keep you too long. I know that you are very busy on your side, but I wanted to quickly, I loved one of your recent posts where you commented on why George W. Bush went into Iraq, and you mentioned Gilgamesh, Stargates, Anunnaki, which I found fascinating because, you know, I sort of delve in those topics quite a lot, but you know, people within the sort of intel world, not necessarily as much, although I see a lot more of those topics coming to the fore. Can we maybe touch on that? What is your thoughts on what is going on there and why Iraq has been so targeted um, from your point of view? You're asking a lot of questions, but I'm hoping we can get a couple of more interesting pools of wisdom for our audience.
Well, Iraq is a very special place. There is a reason that the US military war machine underneath this cabal at what was arguably the height of its power, Anina, chose Iraq to put in the crosshairs and not somewhere else, right? This is immediately on the other side of the Kosovo disaster, the NATO disaster in Yugoslavia and Serbia, and you know, less than 10 years out, really, or right at 10 years out from the dissolution of the Soviet Union, which was a generational event. So Iraq specifically was a very important target of this deep state Luciferian cabal. And one of the reasons for that, actually all of the reasons for that, tie back to the spiritual understanding of who humanity is. Iraq is rife with wealth. Iraq is rife with antiquity. But beneath the desert sands of Iraq are some of the most profound records of humankind that have been preserved because of the environment. You have stargates that they clearly believed were still operational, buried in tombs beneath the western Iraqi desert. You have ceremonial artifacts and artifacts of intense power, artifacts that use the ability to focus acoustics, for example, and actually alter the physical medium around them, artifacts that utilized the same type of power setup, as those that were utilized to build the Great Pyramids. Most people do not realize that the pyramids themselves, you know, we keep asking ourselves, how did they do it? The answer is acoustics. Those pyramids were built using sound. And so looking at the level of technology that may have been, we really don't have good evidence yet, maybe Julian Assange does, but certainly the technology that may have been present and still operational underneath the sands of the Iraqi desert, it's no wonder that the US military machine would want to get their hands all over that. You're talking about devices that harness levels of the interdimensionality of the ethers that we live in, that Holy Spirit medium that I was talking about a moment ago, that no modern technology is capable of doing, certainly not in a public facing fashion. Additionally, you had, you know, flying machines and various inventions that were purported to be in the northern Iraqi desert along the border with Kurdistan, several thousand years old, hailing from the Hindu and Central Asian schools of spiritual worship and invention going back hundreds of years. You know, everyone was told that it was all about oil and drugs, and it definitely was about that too. But it was also about, and primarily about, having control of next generation, world altering capabilities and technologies if they still existed beneath the desert. And it's worth noting, Anina, that we don't yet have a good confirmation on a lot of these issues, even to the present day.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps it's time to bring these subjects to light and to start talking about it and to start seeding the narrative. And it's certainly a very important part of our history, and it's a very important part of our liberation. So it would be great to see this sort of make its way into, public discussions at large. What an exciting time. Many of us have been researching this for years, and it's exciting to see, some of these things, or it looks like it's starting to come into the public narrative very soon. So that is really, really exciting. And what an exciting time to be alive. We literally are at the precipice of the big shift. We stand at the dawn of the golden age, and we've just got to keep at it now, hold the line and hold the light, as I like to say. Maybe, are there any last thoughts that you want to share with our audience in terms of what's happening, or maybe some advice that you can give our audience?
My advice, Anina, is always to continue to hold that torch of truth and keep that encouragement and that faith and that confidence, because you are not crazy. You are not wrong. We are wrong about a lot of things in this journey, and we have been, and that's okay. We can all have a dinner table conversation about being better together. But fundamentally, we are not all collectively crazy. There's not millions of people, literally hundreds of millions of people now in the Western world. On that level of popular agreement and popular understanding on a subject is not, organically incorrect, and it cannot be. Even with the compelling power and psychological warfare of the mainstream media press machine over the last 120 years, they have not even been able to effect the kind of narrative coalescence that we have been able to effect in 5 years' time, because we have truth, we have power, we have the Holy Spirit on our side. So just continue to hold the faith. These events will pop off. President Trump continues to remind us that events are coming in the United States that will shake and forever change the world. That is something that I think is extremely exciting, at least from the point of view of being an American. And if I can, Anina, I'd like to get just a tiny bit personal in my closing for today, because this broadcast will reach a broader, wider international audience than a lot of the ones I do, here domestically in the U.S. As an American, I am extremely excited for the time where I can travel abroad and everyone looks at me and my family as though we are nice to have around, and not as though our government is the singularity that is responsible for some of the most Goliath levels of suffering that have ever been exported to mankind. There's not enough sorrow that I can convey on behalf of the American population, on behalf of myself personally, of what my government, and indeed what all of our governments have been doing to one another. But this is the period of time where that changes, and that changes forever. We have the opportunity here to build something absolutely great. We have the opportunity to have honesty, transparency, accountability again. We have the opportunity to build an earth that's more reflective of how God would want the earth to be. I think all of us want that in our own way and in our own cultural understanding. So I tell people all of the time, Anina, keep the faith, because for the first time, we have an actual real chance at accomplishing that.
Very, very well said. Thank you so much. What a pleasure to have you on once again. Always great to get your perspectives and your points of view and your very sort of measured reasoning and research that you share with us. And thank you so much for all that you do for, this movement. You have been an incredible source of information, source of encouragement, source of education. And yeah, we just want to thank you all for that. I think we touched on so many different subjects tonight, albeit we can jump into many of those subjects much deeper, but I think we've covered a lot, which is awesome. So yeah, hopefully that will lead to more discussions, going down the rabbit hole a little bit further. And we're so close to seeing everything shifting. So yeah, let's onwards and upwards. Let's do this. Thank you so much, SG.
Amen, Anina. God bless. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to coming back.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Speak to you soon. Thank you so much for everyone for joining. If you like this content, do me a favor, like and share, comment, let us know where you're from. If there are any questions that you want to put forward, we can always put that forward next time when we have SG ANON on. And yeah, make sure you subscribe to the channel as well. It is our third channel. We've been deleted twice off this platform, this primary platform, starting with a Y. And it will help us tremendously to get the truth out if you make sure you subscribe, comment, like, share, And of course, join us on Telegram as well, because that's where we share daily news and inspiration, alternative news, real truths. And it really keeps us, keeps us together as a community, keeps us going, and keeps us just inspired, to carry on, because as we said, we're almost there. So hold the light, hold the line, and I'll speak to you all soon.